Barrie, who's been waiting for a long time, calling in from New Zealand. There we go. Barrie, you are live on Truth Wanted. What's up?
Yeah, hi guys. Good to see you, Forrest. I've been watching your videos for a few months now, and I think what comes across is your enthusiasm. I just love it. I love it. It's great.
Well, thank you. That means the world to me.
Yeah, I would say, you know, that guy who was calling you racist and stuff, I think he missed his best argument, you know. What he should have said is, Nathan Bedford Forrest helped start the KKK. Your name is Forrest, therefore...
It would have made a lot more sense than what he said.
I'll get on to my point. We're running out of time, eh? I guess I'm thinking about my own experiences in being a student at high school. You know, we studied science, and I went all the way through the high school system studying science, and then I years later ran into creationists, and I almost would have a brain freeze when I encountered them. Because I wasn't prepared for their arguments and just the weird ways of them approaching things. So I'm wondering if you see any value of including creationism in the school curriculum, not in the sense of advocating it, but more preparing students for what they're going to encounter in the outside world. Like, okay, you need to be aware that there's this whole bunch of ideas out there that you will come across, and maybe, you know, debunk some of the more common themes that they put across, because, you know, some of them can be fairly articulate, and I can imagine students being somewhat confused. Hey, I've never heard of this thing before. What's going on? You know, yeah. You know, up to now, we've always said, let's keep creationism out of the curriculum, of course. But does it actually prepare students if they were aware of it? Now, I would say even perhaps more so in America, because it's not really an issue in New Zealand, right? But, you know, in America, where it's out there and they're going to run into creationists, if they haven't been prepared for some of this, are we really helping them? I guess that's what I'm asking there.
Well, I want to respond first on this one, and I know, Forrest, you have a good answer to it, but I don't think, Barrie, in the United States, adults are becoming creationists because other adults are convincing them. I think the greatest driver of creationism is kids learning it from adults. I sincerely believe that, and I think that there's statistics that back it up. I don't think creationism is growing. I think it grows as a Christian population grows worldwide. Because we're seeing in places such as Africa and other places where missionary work is becoming more common, like in Christian populations growing, you're probably going to see more of that creationism. But I don't think, and correct me if I'm wrong, Forrest, I don't think creationism is growing in the U.S.
Right? I really hope you're right.
I don't think it is. And for that reason, I would say it wouldn't be worth it, because the utility of it wouldn't be there. And the other problem is, at that point, if you're talking about religious arguments in a public school curriculum, that would be a violation of church and state. Like, even I think if it's debunking it, because it is kind of taking a side on some level. Like, I think it would be tricky to implement correctly. I think maybe you could do it in a secular way, but you definitely you'd raise a stink about it for sure. There's a lot of money that goes into, you know, like creationist movements in the U.S. in particular. Yeah. But like, I do think it probably would violate that. I don't know. What do you think, Forrest?
I think that it's really important to teach the history of science while you're teaching science. And I think that's where that would fall in. Rather than saying, hey, there's this thing called creationism and here's this stuff. You wouldn't do that in a geology classroom. You're saying, here's how the earth works. By the way, there are flat earthers out there. You know what I mean? You wouldn't do that. You would just say, at one point, we thought that the earth is flat. And then Eratosthenes came along and proved that that wasn't the case. And now for the past 4,000 years, we haven't thought that anymore. So the same thing with, you know, we didn't know what atoms were. And then, you know, Einstein and his clan figured out how to do, you know, how atomic theory worked. And here now we understand atoms. And you go through the history of the different ways that we knew what atoms were and how they were shaped and what they were made of, and all the talk about the plum pudding model versus the orbital model and all these things. And so you when you do that with evolution, when you talk about biology, you can do the exact same You can say, hey, then, back in the 1700s, when we first started figuring out what fossils were, that was a very disruptive idea, because for the longest time, scientists believe in what we call the great chain of being, where there was this hierarchy of all matter and life on Earth that was popped into existence exactly how it is. You don't have to bring up God. Just you explain that it was created by a deity or whatever, you know what I mean? If you want to include that and say there's this great chain of being. And then when it finally was finally discovered and accepted that, no, these were animals that existed a long time ago and don't exist anymore, that was a crazy contentious idea. The idea of extinction was very controversial for its time. The idea of plate tectonics was very controversial for its time. For a long time, we thought that earthquakes happened because the earth was actually growing in size. It was inflating like a balloon. And up until the 1960s, it was still hotly debated as to whether or not plate tectonics should be taught in school, because it's just a theory. And then we got over it and moved on. Evolution should go the exact same way. We can teach, hey, here's how it works. And we can talk a little bit about the history of these ideas. And that will equip them not only to understand the ideas that are real better, but also to have that debate when someone comes up and says, no, God made everything. You still believe that? That hasn't been true since the 1800s. We proved that wrong with this and this and this and this. All these different scientists proved it. And now you have the whole story and all the evidence behind you as well.
So, okay, I see your point, Forrest, but also a third of Americans still think that it's true, though, right? So it's like, we almost can't talk about it as history. Like, oh, all these people used to believe in this, because, like, there's a lot of people that still believe in it. You know what I mean?
Right. And that's where I would throw in, those comparative things, is that, like, there are a lot of people. There are a lot of people who used to think that if you bury a child under your house alive, that will stop the wind spirits from knocking your house down. And then we learn geometry, and we don't do that anymore, right? And so, like,
I like your take on it, which is just balls to the walls. Fuck it, this is what it is, and you have to deal with it. That's kind of your strategy on this.
It usually is, and you don't have to go out of your way to be like, and here's why creationism is wrong. I would say just treat it like anything else. We used to believe that, and some people still do, that diseases were caused by evil spirits, by witches, by punishment from gods, from whatever like this. And then we learned about microbiology and the germ theory, because remember, germs, viruses, and bacteria, that is a theory too. Germ theory was another revolutionary idea. It's a big deal. Cell theory asks, somebody's a creationist, hey, have you gone out and checked every single living thing, past, present, and future, to make sure that its body is made up of cells and only cells? Because that's cell theory, and it was because two scientists, one plant biologist, one animal biologist, both noticed about the same time that everything they studied was made of cells, and they combined forces to come up with cell theory. So, like, is that something that you're willing to accept, that life is made of cells? If so, why? Why does that evidence better? When you haven't, so like this, when you learn the history of these things, it equips you not only to understand them better, but also to debate them better. And I think the caller's question was like, how should we be teaching about creationism in order to equip kids for when they get confronted with it, which is likely here in America. You don't have to. You don't have to teach creationism directly. You don't have to subject anybody to that any more than you would have to subject anybody to the great chain of being or whatever else. You just teach them the history of the idea, and I feel like that is a better way to, like you said, go balls to the wall with the science without being confrontational, about it.
Yeah, I think you've convinced me on some of this, because I never really thought about this question before, but in thinking about it, I think you're right. Maybe as a construct of like, well, this is what people have thought, and this is what current science thinks. Like maybe that is within the acceptable terms without violating, again, kind of that precedent of church and state separation that we seldom cherish here in the U.S., but should champion more.
It sucks that people like you and I have to worry about it so much more than the people who actually write Bible quotes up on the public school whiteboard, have crosses in the room, teach that evolution's only a theory and shouldn't be. All those things that happen literally every day, and nobody cares because America's majority Christian.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, now I kind of wish I went to public school in New Zealand. That probably would have been pretty cool. Anyway, Barrie, we gave our takes. Any responses? What do you think?
I appreciate the subtlety of it. I like it. I think that would work a lot better. Although, of course, you're always going to have a small minority of, I'm trying to think of a polite word to use, but people who no matter what you do, it won't take, but yeah, I like it. And I think if it worked in alongside, say, discussions in, say, a social studies class about related issues and things, and it could work. Yeah.
And that's what you said is really important. There is that there are going to be some people who just are not going to listen to you. And I always say, when you're teaching, if somebody tells you that you're not going to change their mind, you need to believe them, because you shouldn't waste your time trying to, chip away at that. But honestly, when you just, teach everything as it is and do it that way, I've had a lot more success with it, and it opens the door to more questions. And also, one more thing that I would say is that if anybody confronts you about how evolution isn't real or whatever like that, ask them some of the most common questions and objections that I get all the time about evolution. Okay, so let me ask you this. Why are there still monkeys if humans came from monkeys? Ask them, why do evolutionists have so much faith in Darwin? Why do they just believe everything Darwin said? Ask them, how can random chance make something as complicated as an eyeball? Those are very, very, very easy questions if you understand how evolution actually works and how science actually works. So if they respond to you with, I know, right? Then you automatically, where you're standing now. You know that these people have been robbed of their science education. They have been cheated out of the opportunity to learn how this stuff actually works. You now have a totally different tactic of how you need to talk to them, because you know that if you come into it with jargon and with advanced topics, you're going to lose them. But if they're sitting here at this very basic level, not understanding why there are still monkeys around, then that's a new level of, you can come down. Okay, so let's talk about what the definition of evolution is. Let's talk about what cladograms are. Let's talk about how phylogenies are built. Let's talk about how this stuff actually works, because clearly that's where we have to start.
Forrest really said, start a new tab in incognito mode and see where that gets you.
Education is subversive, man. It's a dance. It's a martial art. You have to be that way.
This man's coming up with military tactics to get through here. I like that. That's really fun. All right. Well, Barrie, thanks so much for calling in. Really appreciate you giving your call at the end of the show here.